My name is Genesis Parker. I was 30 at the time, working as a senior accountant for a furniture manufacturing company in California. I hadn't become CFO yet. Not then. Back then, I was still climbing, still proving, still convincing myself that if I just worked hard enough, I'd finally earn a place in my own family. I lived with my father, James, in a small house on the outskirts of Riverside. Quiet streets, tired palm trees, and a kind of calm you don't appreciate until you've lived without it. Every morning, Dad and I sat on the front porch with coffee. He always woke up first, always brewed it, always read the newspaper like the world might behave if he stared at the headlines long enough. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. And every evening when I came home, the whole house smelled like something warm: garlic, rosemary, butter sizzling in a pan. My dad was an excellent cook. He'd been the head chef at a well-known 3-star restaurant in Santa Monica before he retired. Once I asked him why he still cooks so much now that he didn't have to. He smiled, eyes soft. Even though I'm not working anymore, cooking brings me peace. Every dish is a way for me to show love. That sentence stayed with me, because in our house, love didn't come with loud speeches or grand gestures. It came in coffee cups and cutting boards and meals waiting in the oven. Right then, it was just the two of us taking care of each other, and I felt content. But that calm, it didn't come for free. There used to be 4 of us: my dad, my mom Stella, my older brother Hudson, and me. 2 years after what I'm about to tell you, we cut all family ties. To me, now they're strangers who happen to share my DNA. This story started in July 2023. One weekend afternoon, my mom called and invited me to dinner. My place was about 20 minutes from my parents' house, so we still saw each other every now and then, usually weekends, usually brief. I almost said no, but there was a softness in her voice that morning, the kind that made you think, maybe today will be different. So at around 6 p.m., I pulled up to the front gate, and my stomach sank. A silver Honda Civic was parked outside. Hudson's car. Of course it was. I sat there for a second with my hand still on the wheel, staring at it like it had personally insulted me. Mom hadn't mentioned him, hadn't warned me. She'd invited me like this was my dinner. But Hudson being here meant one thing: I wasn't the guest. I was the resource. When I walked inside, Hudson was sprawled on the old brown leather sofa, eyes glued to his phone like the world didn't exist outside that screen. His 2 boys, Jose and Peter, were on the rug building Lego towers, laughing so loud it filled the whole living room. Jose was 8. Peter was 6. And even though they didn't live under the same roof anymore, they were close in a way that made you believe in something. Hudson looked up just long enough to give me a half-hearted wave. Not a smile, not a hey, just a flick of the fingers, like I was a neighbor passing by, not his sister. Then his eyes dropped back to the phone. Hudson is my older brother, 2 years ahead of me, and in our family, he was always the chosen one, the golden child, the one who could do wrong and still be comforted. He'd been married to Camilla for 8 years. They divorced in 2022, and when it happened, Hudson played the victim to anyone who would listen. Camilla was selfish, he'd tell friends. She only thought about herself. I worked so hard, and all I wanted was to come home and relax, but she kept demanding more. But I knew the truth. Hudson was controlling, lazy. The kind of man who believed marriage meant being served. He could spend an entire day watching TV while Camilla worked, cared for the kids, cooked, cleaned, everything. And if she asked him to help, he'd snap like she'd insulted him. I'm making money, he'd say. Housework is your job. Camilla endured it for 8 years, until she finally realized she was living like a single mom, with a husband sitting right there. After the divorce, they split custody. Hudson took Jose. Camilla kept Peter. Weekends were arranged so the boys could still see each other, which meant my mom got her favorite thing in the world: grandkids as leverage. I forced myself to keep my face neutral and walked past Hudson toward the kitchen. Mom and Dad were there chopping vegetables together. Dad's expression was gentle as always, like he was trying to keep the air calm with sheer willpower. Without thinking, I rolled up my sleeves and joined them. I placed a bottle of red wine on the counter, the one I'd picked up on the way. Dad examined the label, smiled warmly, and said, "Thanks for remembering what I like." It was such a small compliment, but it hit me in the chest. Because at least someone in this family still saw me, still valued me. My dad, James, had always been soft-spoken, peace over confrontation, the type who nodded along when my mom decided things, even when I could see disagreement flicker in his eyes. Once, years ago, I asked him why he never stood up to her. He smiled like he'd made peace with a life I didn't understand. In marriage, sometimes you choose your battles. Your mom has a strong personality. As long as she's happy, that's enough for me. My mom, Stella, was the kind of woman who needed the final say in everything. Big decisions, small decisions, even what spice went into the soup. She wasn't evil. But she loved control the way some people love oxygen. And Hudson? Hudson was her favorite project. Around 7 p.m., we all sat down for dinner. The table looked beautiful. The food was delicious. For a moment, the atmosphere almost felt normal, warm, alive, held together by the boys' laughter. Jose nudged Peter. Eat your veggies. Peter broke his bread in half and slid a piece onto Jose's plate. When Peter spilled his drink, Jose immediately grabbed a napkin, wiping it up with a grin. It's okay, Peter. I spill stuff all the time, too. They giggled like it was a joke and not a problem. No blame, no scolding, just kindness. Watching them, something tightened in my throat, because I wished Hudson and I had grown up like that. When we were kids, Hudson never shared anything with me. Candy, toys, the best seat in front of the TV, everything went to him first. And if I protested, Mom would say, let your brother have it, he's older. Like being older meant being more deserving. That dinner ended on a cheerful note, and for a second, I let myself enjoy it. Then we cleared the table. Mom wiped her hands and said, let's all sit in the living room for a bit. I have something to say. Her tone changed. Careful, controlled, like she'd been holding her breath through dinner. My skin prickled. A few minutes later, we sat in the living room. Hudson stayed welded to his phone. Dad took his usual armchair. I sat near the window where I could feel air and not just pressure. Mom poured coffee for everyone. Then she took a sip, set her cup down, and turned to me with a look that didn't feel like a mother looking at her daughter. It felt like a banker looking at a loan. How's work going? She asked. How much have you managed to save? I kept my voice vague. I'm doing fine. The job's steady. I make enough to live on. She nodded like she'd checked a box in her head. Then she said casually, as if she were asking me to pass the sugar, can you lend me $400,000? I nearly choked on my coffee. I stared at her, convinced I'd misheard. Did you say 100,000? She didn't even blink. Hudson needs a house. Lend him the money. I'll co-sign. Across the room, Hudson didn't look up. Not once. Like my savings were already his, and this was just the paperwork step. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Because I did have money saved. Years of discipline. Years of saying no to vacations, no to luxury, no to anything that might slow my climb. But lending Hudson $400,000 wasn't lending. It was throwing money into a fire and hoping it came back out clean. I took a breath, steadying myself. Mom, I said carefully, that's huge money. I can't lend it. Her face tightened immediately. Genesis, she snapped. With your job and income, you can afford it. Don't be selfish. Help your brother. Selfish. That word, like a slap. When I didn't move, she leaned forward, voice turning sugary in that dangerous way. If you don't want to lend the money, then let Hudson live in your house. He needs a stable place. My pulse thundered in my ears. A grown man, 32, 2 kids. And his mother was still trying to negotiate his life for him like he was a helpless child. I stood up, voice sharp and steady. There will be no $400,000, I said, and I am not giving up my house. Mom's composure cracked. Her voice rose, slicing through the room. It's truly sad to have such a selfish daughter in this family. That's when Hudson finally looked up, eyes flat, and said, You're heartless. You're going to let your nephews go without a stable home. I stared him down. They're your kids, I said. You're their father. Take responsibility. Don't pass it off on someone else. Dad stayed silent, and that silence hurt more than my mother's yelling, because it told me exactly where I stood. I grabbed my coat and walked out, hands shaking as I reached the door. And as I stepped into the night, I promised myself, if they ever tried this again, I would never come back. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the money. My mother could have asked for $1 million, and it still wouldn't have hurt as much as the way she asked. Like my savings were family property. Like my hard work was a resource meant to be distributed, mostly to Hudson. I drove home through the darkness with the windows cracked, letting the cool air sting my face like a punishment. In my head, I replayed the living room scene over and over, Mom's voice sharpening, Hudson's lazy blame, and Dad sitting there like a statue. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were numb on the steering wheel. Maybe he didn't want to get involved, I told myself. Maybe he thought silence would keep the peace. But even as I tried to make excuses for him, the truth kept pushing through. He'd watched them corner me, and he let it happen. Over the next few days, Mom didn't call. Neither did Hudson. Part of me felt relieved, like the house had finally gone quiet after a storm, but another part of me stayed tense, waiting for the next strike. So I buried myself in work. I showed up earlier than usual, stayed later than necessary, drowning in spreadsheets and quarterly reports because numbers were honest. Numbers didn't guilt trip you. Numbers didn't use children as bargaining chips. 2 weeks later, on a Monday morning, my phone rang while I was tying my hair up for work. Dad! He almost never called me first. I answered immediately. Dad? His voice sounded different, somber, like someone walking through a hallway they didn't want to enter. Genesis, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped. What is it? There was a pause, the kind that felt heavy with regret. Your mom and Hudson, they went ahead and bought the house. I blinked. They did what? They used $100,000 from her savings for the down payment, he continued. And the remaining $300, his voice lowered, like he was afraid the walls might hear. It's listed under you for financing. For a second, my brain refused to process it, like someone had said the sky was green and expected me to nod along. Under me? I repeated slowly. What does that mean, Dad? It means, he said, and I heard the strain now. They're trying to make you responsible. Be careful. My throat tightened. How can they even do that without my signature? They might not have finalized it yet, he admitted, but they're trying. I saw paperwork. Something hot rose in my chest. Rage, disbelief, and beneath it, a familiar bitter grief. They hadn't asked. They hadn't discussed. They'd just decided to run at the cliff and tie me to their waist on the way down. I gripped my phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Why are you telling me this? He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Because I don't want to see you being mistreated anymore. That sentence hit me like a sudden light cutting through fog. All my life, Dad had been quiet. Gentle, agreeable, always smoothing over Mom's sharp edges. I'd assumed he didn't notice the favoritism, or worse, he didn't care. But right then, in that one sentence, I realized he'd seen it all. He'd just been too afraid to stop it. Dad? My voice cracked before I could control it. I'm sorry, he said softly. I should have spoken up a long time ago. I swallowed hard. Thank you for telling me. The call ended, but my hands were still trembling. I tried to focus at work, but my mind kept spiraling. They can't do that. They can't put a loan under my name without me. Yet the fact that they were even attempting it, plotting, scheming, made my skin crawl. And something else gnawed at me too. Dad said he saw paperwork. Meaning Mom wasn't bluffing. She was moving. That afternoon when I got home, I knew it before I even parked. My gate was open, and outside my house, like a scene pulled from a nightmare, stood my mother, my brother, and the boys. Jose and Peter were close beside Hudson, unusually quiet. Their eyes kept darting between the adults, like they didn't know whether they were allowed to breathe. Mom's posture was stiff, purposeful. Hudson looked bored, like this was an errand he didn't want to run. My chest tightened with irritation, but I forced myself to stay calm. The neighbors' curtains were always half open on this street. They loved a show. I walked up slowly, keys in hand. What are you doing here? Mom's smile was thin. We need to talk. Hudson didn't even greet me. Jose mumbled, Hi, Aunt Genesis. Peter waved weakly. I opened the door and stepped aside. Fine, come in. The moment they entered, my home felt invaded, like the walls themselves stiffened. Mom didn't waste time. She sat on my sofa like she owned it and said far too casually, Genesis, Hudson, and I just bought a house. Hudson sank into an armchair, already pulling out his phone. Mom continued, It's worth $400,000. We paid $100,000 up front. The remaining $300 will be paid in installments. I kept my face neutral. Congratulations. She nodded, as if I'd passed the first test. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of documents. She placed them on my coffee table with a soft thud. Right now, she said calmly, Hudson is unemployed, and I only have my pension. You need to sign here and cover the first year of payments. After that, Hudson will take over. He'll pay you back every cent. The way she said it, like she was outlining a grocery list, made something in me go icy. I stared down at the papers. I didn't need to touch them to know what they were. A trap wrapped in family. Because in finance, there's a simple truth. The person who signs is the person who bleeds. And Hudson? Hudson didn't do paying back. Hudson did taking. I looked up. No. Mom blinked. No? I'm not signing, I said evenly. And I'm not paying. Her face immediately hardened. Genesis, don't be ridiculous. Can't you see the kids need a proper home? Hudson finally glanced up, voice full of practiced blame. Yeah. You really want them stuck in rentals forever? I felt my jaw tighten. They're not stuck anywhere. Hudson, you're their father. Get a job. Mom slammed her hand lightly on the arm of the sofa. Watch your mouth. Then she turned her head slightly, just slightly, toward the boys, like giving a silent cue. And that's when Jose spoke, in a voice that sounded too rehearsed for an 8-year-old. Aunt Genesis, please help us. We want a home to live in. My stomach flipped. Peter stepped forward, wrapped his small arms around my waist, and started sobbing. Please help my dad, he cried. I don't want to live in a rented place anymore. My heart cracked, not because of what he said, but because I could hear the adult script under the child voice. I crouched down, gently holding Peter's shoulders and pulling back enough to look at him. Sweetheart, I said softly, who told you to say that? Peter hiccuped, eyes wide. He looked at Jose. Jose looked at Mom, and in that tiny, heartbreaking moment, I saw it. The fear. The way children learn to read adults like weather. Peter's voice dropped to a whisper. Grandma told us, he admitted. She said, if we didn't, she wouldn't love us anymore. For a second, the room went completely silent. Even Hudson stopped scrolling. Something in me snapped cleanly in two. I stood up slowly, turning toward my mother. You use them, I said, my voice shaking, not with weakness, but with rage. You use children to manipulate me. Mom scoffed like I was being dramatic. Don't twist this. I'm trying to help the family. The family? I repeated bitterly. Or Hudson? Hudson's lips curled. Here we go again. Always jealous, always. Enough, my voice cut through his like a blade. I pointed at the door. Get out of my house. Mom's eyes widened in outrage. Genesis! I said get out, I repeated louder, or I'm calling 911. Jose froze. Peter clung to Hudson's leg, still sniffling. For once, Mom saw something in my face that told her I wasn't playing. She stood abruptly, snatching up her purse. Hudson muttered under his breath and began herding the boys toward the door. But Mom wasn't done. She turned at the threshold, eyes blazing with the kind of fury only a parent can justify to themselves. I'll sue you, she spat. You ungrateful bastard. And the shocking part? I didn't even flinch. I looked her straight in the eye and said, calm as glass. That's your choice. Then I closed the door. My whole body trembled after they left, like my nerves were trying to crawl out of my skin. A second later, there was a soft knock. When I opened the door, Dad was standing there. He hadn't come in with them. He'd stayed back, like he didn't want to contaminate my house with what they were doing. He didn't say much. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, warm, steady, and for a moment, the shaking in my chest slowed. I wanted to ask him 1,000 things. Why now? Why didn't you stop her? Why did it take a lawsuit threat for you to finally see me? But instead, I just whispered, thank you. He nodded, eyes tired. You did the right thing. After he left, I stood alone in the living room, staring at the abandoned stack of papers on my table. I wanted to believe Mom's threat was empty, just another tantrum. But something deep in my gut, some instinct sharpened by years of being second, told me this was different. This time she wasn't just angry. This time she was desperate. And desperate people don't bluff. I found the court notice a week later. It was tucked between grocery coupons and utility bills. Thin, white, official. The kind of envelope that changes your life without raising its voice. I stood at my kitchen counter, fingers numb as I opened it. Civil complaint. Plaintiff, Stella Parker. Defendant, Genesis Parker. Claimed. Amount, $200,000. For a moment, I just stared. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so violently absurd my brain didn't know what else to do. According to the complaint, my mother claimed she had financially supported me through college from 2013 to 2016, giving me $50,000 in cash each year, tuition, living expenses, family support. She stated the money was given in cash, which explained the lack of bank records. And then came the line that made my stomach drop. The plaintiff has a witness who can confirm the transfer of funds. I didn't need to read the name. I already knew. I called her immediately. She picked up after 2 rings. Genesis, she said, her voice calm, too calm. Have you read it? You're suing me, I said flatly, over money that never existed. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. I told you, I don't want this to get ugly. I clenched my jaw. Then why did you file a lawsuit? There was a pause, then her voice shifted, soft, transactional. If you agree to sign and take over the mortgage payments for Hudson, she said, I'll withdraw the case. Something inside me went very, very quiet. So that's it, I said slowly. You're fabricating a lie, just to force me to pay for his house. You're being dramatic, she snapped. Families help each other. No, I said, my voice rising despite myself. Families don't threaten. Families don't lie in court. Her tone hardened. This is your last chance to fix this. I felt heat rush to my face. My hand shook, but my decision was already made. Fine, I said sharply. I'll see you in court. Then I hung up. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat down on the edge of my sofa, heart pounding, not with fear, but with clarity. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. That night I didn't cry. I researched. I read statutes, civil procedures, burden of proof. I knew enough business law from my field to understand one critical thing. Claims require evidence, and my mother had none. I decided to represent myself. Not because I couldn't afford a lawyer, but because I refused to let her twist this into another story where I was the dependent child and she was the benevolent provider. I knew my truth, and I was ready to stand in it. In the weeks leading up to the trial, memories from college resurfaced like ghosts. I remembered cramped dorm rooms, juggling part-time shifts at the campus library, studying until my eyes burned. I remembered instant noodles, cheap sandwiches, selling old textbooks just to afford new ones. I'd taken out federal student loans the moment I turned 18. Every cent of my education had been paid for by me. My labor, my debt, my discipline. My mother had never sent me money. Not once. Court day arrived on a gray morning. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile, echoing, unforgiving. As I walked in alone, I saw them already seated. My mother, Hudson, and behind them, my mother's side of the family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Their eyes followed me as I walked past, some with disappointment, some with open contempt. To them, I wasn't Genesis. I was the ungrateful daughter, the selfish sister, the one who dared to say no. My mother sat upright, confident, dressed like she was attending church. Hudson leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't look nervous. That hurt more than I expected. When the judge called the case, my mother stood and testified first. Between 2013 and 2016, she said, she had given me $50,000 in cash each year. She spoke smoothly, her voice steady, eyes fixed on the judge like she was telling the most natural story in the world. Then Hudson was called as the witness. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and lied without hesitation. I personally saw my mother give Genesis $50,000 in cash, he said, 4 times, at the beginning of each school year. She promised to pay it back after graduation. Each word felt like a small betrayal layered on top of years of quiet ones. I watched him. My brother, the boy I used to follow around the house, the man I once gave money to without question, fabricate my past like it meant nothing. My mother's lawyer turned to me with a practiced smile. Ms. Parker, he began, can you prove you didn't receive this money? I inhaled slowly. Objection, I said. The burden of proof lies with the plaintiff. I've asked for evidence of the alleged transfers, bank records, written agreements, messages. None exist. The judge nodded slightly. The lawyer tried again, but you can't prove the money wasn't given. I met the judge's eyes. Your Honor, with respect, proving a negative without evidence is not a legal standard. Additionally, the witness is the plaintiff's son, financially dependent on her and directly benefiting from this lawsuit. The courtroom stirred. I could feel the tension tightening like a wire. The judge ordered further evidence. There was none. The back and forth continued for nearly an hour, the air growing heavier with every unanswered question. Then, a chair scraped. I looked up. My father stood. My heart skipped. Dad? Enough, he said, his voice trembling, but firm. I can't sit here and listen to lies anymore. The courtroom turned. The judge raised a brow. Sir, do you wish to testify? Dad nodded once. Yes. My mother's face drained of color. Hudson's confidence cracked. As my father stepped toward the stand, something shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, he wasn't staying silent. And I knew, whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. My father took the oath with hands that trembled just slightly. Not from fear, but from restraint. The kind that comes from holding your tongue for decades and finally deciding you won't anymore. He turned toward the judge, then toward my mother and Hudson. His eyes lingered on them, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it felt heavier than rage. I can't sit here and watch my daughter be lied about under oath, he said. There was never any $200,000. My mother shot to her feet. James, what are you saying? Hudson leaned forward, panic flickering across his face. Dad, stop. The judge struck the gavel. Order! Sir, you may continue. Dad swallowed, then spoke with a steadiness I had never heard from him before. Genesis has been financially independent since she turned 18. She applied for student loans on her own. She worked part-time through college. Stella did not give her money, cash or otherwise. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My mother shook her head violently. That's not true. He's lying. He's trying to protect her. Dad's voice hardened. I'm telling the truth, something I should have done a long time ago. He explained everything. The house purchase, the pressure, the attempt to force me into signing the mortgage. He told the court how Stella and Hudson planned to trap me financially when they couldn't get me to agree willingly. Hudson jumped up. He's confused. He doesn't remember things clearly anymore. That did it. Dad turned slowly to face his son. I remember perfectly, he said. I remember every time your sister was told to step aside so you could have more. I remember every excuse, every second chance, and I remember how quiet I stayed while she learned to survive on her own. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge struck the gavel again. Enough. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. I've heard sufficient testimony. He announced a recess for deliberation. 30 minutes felt like a lifetime. I sat alone, hands folded, breathing slowly. Across the room, my mother whispered frantically to her lawyer. Hudson stared at the floor, leg bouncing. When the judge returned, he didn't waste time. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, or lack thereof, the court rules in favor of the defendant, Genesis Parker. Relief washed through me. Not triumphant, not celebratory, just release. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, the plaintiff and her witness will be responsible for all court costs. Based on testimony provided today, this court refers the matter to criminal court for potential charges of perjury and defamation. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Hudson went pale, eyes hollow. I felt nothing resembling victory, only grief. Outside the courtroom, my mother's relatives surrounded me like a firing squad. How could you do this to your own mother? One aunt snapped. You destroyed this family over money, another hissed. I looked at them calmly. If you care that much, I said evenly, you can pay for Hudson's house. Then I walked away. That afternoon, as I sat in my living room trying to process everything, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, my father stood there with 2 suitcases. He looked older, smaller. She threw me out, he said quietly. She said I betrayed the family. I didn't hesitate. You can stay as long as you want, I said, pulling him into a hug. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. The house felt different once Dad moved in. Not louder, not busier, just steadier. He unpacked quietly, folding his clothes with the same care he used when plating food. By the next morning, the front porch plants were watered, the kitchen counters wiped clean, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the hallway before my alarm even went off. I told him he didn't have to do all that. He smiled and said, "Let me take care of the small things. You've handled enough." A few weeks later, the divorce paperwork was finalized. 35 years of marriage ended with signatures and silence. Their shared house sold quickly. The proceeds were split evenly, $400,000 each. What didn't surprise me was what Mom did with her share. She gave every cent to Hudson, paid off the remaining balance on the house he couldn't afford. What did surprise me was Dad. One evening, he sat me down at the kitchen table and slid his phone across to me. A bank transfer notification. $400,000. From James Parker. I stared at it, stunned. Dad, why? He met my eyes. Because you've always been fair, and because I trust you. My throat tightened. I didn't spend the money on myself. A week later, I bought a modest 3-bedroom home in suburban Riverside, just under $400,000. We rented it out as passive income, not for profit chasing, but for security. Something solid. Something Dad could always come back to if he ever wanted independence again. As for the legal fallout, the criminal trial moved fast. Mom received 3 years of probation. No prison time, but strict monitoring. One mistake, and she'd serve the full sentence. Hudson wasn't as lucky. 3 years in prison. 200 hours of community service. But the harshest sentence wasn't the cell. The court awarded full custody of Jose and Peter to Camila, and Hudson officially lost his parental rights. When I heard that, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt mourning. For the boys. For what could have been. For a family that chose greed over love. 2 years have passed now. Dad still lives with me. We still share coffee every morning. He's peaceful, lighter even. Sometimes he says he has no regrets. I believe him. Mom lives alone. We don't speak. Hudson may be released early for good behavior. I don't know what kind of man he'll be when he walks out. I hope he learns something. For the kids' sake. Okay. Camila brings Jose and Peter to visit sometimes. They laugh again. That matters. And me? I'm in a relationship now. With a man who listens. Who doesn't ask me to shrink so he can feel taller. His ex-girlfriend tried to stir things early on. Quiet comparisons, subtle digs, but this time, I didn't second guess myself. I set boundaries, and they held. Some relatives still call me cruel, say I destroyed the family over money. But here's the truth they refuse to face. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped letting it destroy me. So I'll ask you, if you were in my place, what would you have done?